Well, friends and fiends, I certainly hope you enjoyed the first little offering in our four-course meal tonight. I know I certainly did. I've been a fan of Bela Lugosi's, well, as long as I can remember. Now, Lugosi would only play Count Dracula one more time, and that would come in 1948 as part of that mammoth monster cast of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, along with Lon Chaney as the Wolfman and Glenn Strange as Frankenstein's monster. And as luck would have it, Turner Classic Movies will be airing Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein this coming Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, following Young Frankenstein at 8 o'clock. Now, it just so happens that Ye Old Dragon will be happily guest hosting the TCM party for those two films. So I hope you'll join me this coming Sunday night starting at 8 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. Be there. Aloha. Now, getting back to tonight's films. Edward Van Sloan, who played Professor Van Helsing in tonight's film, would actually reprise that role 5 years later for Dracula's daughter. Now, why it took 5 years to bring to the screen, well, I'm not sure myself. Maybe it was just a case of Universal wasn't sure about how sequels would do back in the day. I mean, it was pretty much unheard of back then, especially for horror movies. It wasn't until they really had a success with Bride of Frankenstein after Frankenstein had done so well. So it just took a little bit of time, I guess, to get the ball rolling. But nonetheless, Dracula's Daughter is a direct sequel to Dracula. In fact, it starts mere minutes after the end of Dracula, right after Van Helsing has staked Dracula in his coffin. It certainly gives an interesting spin on the movie vampire legend, and it's definitely worth a watch if you can find it. It's certainly a little bit racier in some spots than its predecessor. And speaking of racier versions of Dracula, some of you might not be aware of this, but Universal actually produced a Spanish language version of Dracula simultaneously with Browning's version. Well, simultaneously meaning that they filmed that at night with a completely different cast, a different crew, and a different director. In this case, it would be George Melford, assisted by Enrique Tovar Avalos. And starring as Dracula was Carlos Valerius, and Lupita Tovar starred as Ava. In case you're wondering, Ava is the Mina part from Browning's Dracula. The screenwriters basically took all the Anglo names and changed them into more Latin names for Latin American consumption. Now, there has been some arguments over the years where the Spanish version is actually superior to Browning's version. I see them as two different films. And the arguments are mostly over the cinematography. George Robinson was the cinematographer for the Spanish version. And he did a great job with it. I've seen the movie. And there are certainly a few more atmospheric takes on different scenes than there were in Browning's version. Now, the cinematographer for that version of Dracula was Karl Freund. So that's why I'm a little hesitant to fully submit to Robinson's version being superior, because Freund was one of the best cinematographers and directors of his day. In fact, it has been said that Freund actually directed the bulk of Dracula as opposed to Browning, because Browning was so depressed on the movie for so long, because, you see, Lon Chaney Sr. was actually supposed to play Dracula, and he was great friends with Browning. And Chaney died just before pre-production for Dracula was supposed to start. and supposedly Browning lost the spirit driving force to deliver Dracula fully, which meant that the bulk of the directing as well as the cinematography fell on Karl Freund's shoulders. So he had a little bit more to do than Mr. Robinson did. But regardless, there are still some shots that do actually look a little bit better in the Spanish version, but I don't think it completely blows away the Browning version. Certainly Lugosi's performance as Dracula, in my opinion at least, is better than Valerius's, who looked a little comical at times with his huge bulging eyes and his snarls and a little bit wheeziness. It's a little bit racier too, as I said, because of the lower cut gowns that Lupita Tovar wore, and they were a little bit more sheer as well than Helen Chandler's over in the Browning version. But yeah, so if you can find it, by all means see it, so you can judge for yourself. That's the best way to do it, really. If you want to see, if you haven't seen the Spanish language version of Dracula or Dracula's Daughter, both are available as part of Universal's Dracula Legacy collection. That's available on both DVD and Blu-ray, so by all means, pick it up. I think you'll enjoy it. If you like Dracula movies, you should get the whole picture. You really should, to see the whole history of Dracula in cinema. Okay, but now let us leave Transylvania behind and set our sights on ancient Egypt. Now, in 1932, Universal decided to cash in on the then still current Egyptian craze. You see, it was very recently around then that King Tut's tomb had been discovered. And the story came out about the curse of the mummy, following the archaeologists and the museum executives to their doom. And so, Karl Freund was chosen to direct the great Boris Karloff as Imhotep, the immortal mummy. So, sit back, relax, and let's get wrapped up in The Mummy. And I'll see you before the next film.